Well, hello, America and the rest of the world. I am Robert Wilonsky, the Communications Director at Heritage Auctions, and it is my great pleasure, a joy, a thrill, a delight, and an honor to be joined by Aviva Lehmann, the Director of American Art at Heritage Auctions, as we sit for the first time, at least together, in these Chicago offices.
Yeah.
This, I have to tell you, what a lovely place to be.
Oh, this is like one of my favorite Heritage Gallery spaces. I love it here.
It is quite a delight. When I got here this morning, and look, here's the deal. I'm sure you've watched these before. Aviva and I are going to preview the American Art Auction that takes place November 4th. It is currently in preview here in Chicago through tomorrow, correct?
That's right, tomorrow at 5 o'clock.
You're giving a presentation tonight, correct?
I am. If anyone's in Chicago, join us.
And it's going to be in Dallas at the headquarters, the 2nd and 3rd. You will be there as well.
That finishes the world tour. We've already exhibited in New York. Now we're in Chicago. Then we head back to Texas. And these are all great towns for American art.
And then the auction, of course, takes place November 4th.
That's right.
But when I got here this morning, and I'm just going to welcome you into our world a little bit, because I know people are here just to watch Aviva talk about anything, especially anything American art related. When I got here this morning, you were giving a tour of this auction to a bunch of students. Where were they from?
They are local art students, fabulous students, and I will always make time for the next generation of American art world stars. You know, we need to find more people for American art. It's not all about contemporary art, people. We got a really great American art. So yes, I love that. And they always ask great questions because they're artists themselves.
They were enamored of what they saw here.
Well, many important illustrators of the Golden Age started or have associations with Chicago.
Correct.
Like Haddon Sandblom, who's hanging right behind us, Coca-Cola Santa man. He was a Chicago boy.
That's right. A lot of folks went to the Chicago Art Institute.
Yep, that's right.
Spent a lot of time there.
Yep.
I have friends who went there as well after our time at the University of Texas together.
Love
Chris
that.
Ware being the most notable.
Of course, Chris Ware, yes.
So I'm fascinated by this conversation, in as much as that whenever we get together, you always have a story to tell about these particular auctions.
I do.
There's some meaning behind them. There's some way in which you have put them together. What is the story of this American auction?
It's funny because every sale that I put together, I have some preconceived ideas. I want to build on our successes of our most recent sales, but they start to take on a life of their own. And what we did here is push the envelope further than we've taken it in season pasts. And we've had a tremendous amount of success in American art over the past 10 years. We hold over 130 auction records in the category. We have already broadened the marketplace for illustration art by already including children's book illustrations in the folds. And we've got some great examples here.
Right.
We've set records with them. They're crowd favorites. But we went even further. And as you know, I do believe that American art very closely mirrors and relates to American history. And so
they are inextricably intertwined.
They are inextricably intertwined. And where some houses are taking the standalone American art sale and moving some key pieces into other categories, we're doing the opposite here. As America's Auction House, we want to truly elevate the brand for American art, the category, and therefore we, rather than farming out highlights from our sale to other categories,
right,
we're taking from other categories and putting them into American a little bit if they relate to American art.
What is something that's in this auction that would have been in, say, another auction 2 or 3 years ago?
Well, the most obvious one is the Rothko right behind me,
which we are going to talk about at great length in just a moment.
Exactly.
But that certainly is one of them.
That's one of them. But you can go even further. We've got a fabulous Mary Cassatt dry point that some might put into a print multiple sale, but it tells such an important story about the history of printmaking in America and American Impressionism that we felt it was important to include that in this context as well. And we're getting a lot of positive feedback for the Cassatt. We've got some, private collectors, institutions. A lot of people are noticing it. It's a real celebration of all aspects of American art. So once again, we cover a very broad range of history and time. So we have everything from Hudson River School, early 19th century, all the way up until Rothko, and everything in between in the sale.
So I'm very excited. And look, I told you the day I saw it come in, the day I saw this entered in the catalog, that this was going to be my favorite piece. It has remained so. It's over my right shoulder. It is, of course, the Maurice Sendak that was on the cover of Rolling Stone for the Christmas issue 1976.
Love it.
There was a big piece about Maurice Sendak in that particular issue.
That's right.
It's a terrific story. I've had that issue probably for the last 30 or 40 years.
Did you?
I've always had it. I collect Rolling Stones.
Love that.
So I had this.
Oh my gosh, I love that.
I was very excited about it.
As you should be.
So Sendak has certainly become incredibly popular in these auctions in the last couple of years.
That's exactly right. And traditionally, for many years, if a Sendak would come up at auction, you may find them in the category of books and manuscripts, for instance. But it is a true continuation of the story of Golden Age illustration. It's our age of illustration. And so the market is responding in such an extraordinary way. We've sold 2 major Sendak covers in the past 2 years. With each one, we've set a new benchmark. For Sendak, we've set his new auction record twice. One was a preparatory drawing for a poster for the Art Institute.
That's right.
Sort of, coming back to Chicago. We sold that one for over $170,000. And in our last sale, we had another fabulous Sendak that we sold for $225,000. And so we've got this one here, also completely fresh to the market. And I think it's so fun because the monsters in their own right are they're icons. Right. They're as famous as Winnie the Pooh. And they're as famous as Big Bird. And everybody, the students who were in here a couple hours ago, you could see the smiles on their faces.
That's the one they grabbed, that and the Rockwell they gravitated to the most, because I think in some ways it's the most familiar and the most famous.
Absolutely. And this one is adorable. And you've got 2 little kids dressing up. Moish is one of his famous monsters that was based on his immigrant aunts and uncles from the old world in Europe before World War II, where he based his monsters on these elderly family members who would come up to him and say, "Get over here, I want to eat you." And so, of course, he created these fabulously warm and fuzzy flesh-eating monsters that want to eat children, live in your closet. But somehow this is a warming, comforting children's book illustration, which speaks to the genius of Sendak. But once again, we've got one of his iconic monsters up there they're dressing him up for Christmas. The colors are great. That blue background really makes it pop. He was the ultimate draftsman. He didn't only do children's book illustrations, but he was fiercely aware of his color schemes and the composition because he worked on play sets as well. So you really see all of that going on in his head in this fabulous work.
Before we get to the cover lot, which is next to it, I should also remind you that if you have a question for Aviva, feel free to drop it here. After all, how often do you get the opportunity to ask her questions? Unless, of course, you come tonight.
That's true.
Or you're a student, an art student.
That's right.
So drop them here. If you want to do it anonymously, email it to tommyn@ha.com. And Tommy will, our director, he and Linda, will drop it in here as well. So I assume you have a lot of questions. You are watching, after all. Aviva is here, after all.
We love being live with you.
And she's here for you.
I'm here for you. That's right.
She's not here for me. Trust me. So the cover lot's behind me as well.
Yes.
You referred to it as Dohanos's Mona Lisa.
It is. It is Dohanos's Mona Lisa. And the visceral reaction that I have to this Dohanos penny candy, most recently I had the same feeling with Leindecker's Football Hero that we sold for.
The cover image.
There's our cover. It's amazing. Look, a Golden Age illustration was meant to be reproduced, so it looks fabulous on the cover. And I actually love it on the cover because it allows our viewers and our clients to see every little detail in this true masterwork. It's amazing. And Dohanos is one of those artists, much like Leindecker, that has been overshadowed for decades by Norman Rockwell. And we are not taking anything away. We love Norman Rockwell. He's the grandfather, so to speak, in many ways, of the entire movement of Golden Age illustration. Certainly the most popular, certainly the biggest moneymaker. His auction record for Rockwell is $46 million.
Still the most influential. Alex Ross, comic book maker. To this very day, Alex Ross's superheroes, his Superman looks very much like Norman Rockwell's work.
Oh, I love that. I didn't know that.
Yes.
I love that. See, this is why it's important you're here.
That's not that important.
So this Dohanos, we have sold all Golden Age illustration very well. Not only Rockwell and, of course, Leindecker. Now we hold the auction record at $4.1 million. The second highest price is also ours at Heritage. We set last season with the first suit, a Saturday Evening Post cover that we sold for $615,000. But
that's my favorite.
Wasn't that great?
I love that piece.
I know you did. Did it remind you of your bar mitzvah suit?
It did, actually, yes.
It's what everyone loves about it.
It reminded me of buying my son's bar mitzvah suit.
Yes. He looked a little bit like your son,
There you go.
the main character. But this Dohanos has it. It has everything going for it. It is a true tour de force, showcasing his extraordinary talent as a draftsman, a great storyteller. It feels like a film still. And I know this image of penny candy since I was a little girl, because I used to go to the Jersey Shore every summer in Margate, and they used to have a penny candy store that had this image on the wall. And that says a lot about Golden Age illustration in general. You can always sense which ones are the crowd favorites and are the most iconic by how reproduced they are. And if you look up penny candy, if you do a simple Google search, you will see posters and mugs and figurines and calendars. And that says a lot about how important this Dohanos is. Now, we did establish an auction record for Dohanos twice in the past, but I am almost certain, knock on wood, let's pretend this
There's
is wood.
nothing wood in here except for that post. And
knock on wood, that we are going to set a new auction record for Dohanos with this work.
yeah,
It does remind me a lot of the Football Hero, which you may recall we offered with an estimate of $150,000 to $250,000, and it sold for $4.1 million. It took about 18 minutes to sell. Based on the extraordinary response so far, with still 10 days to go, with the amount of interest in the Dohanos, I know that it will be exciting to watch. So all of you, feel free to watch the auction. It will be fun to watch this Dohanos sell.
here's a question, and I like breaking this up with questions.
Let's do it.
Thank you for asking them, first of all. And I'd like to sort of flesh this out by asking which American artists. This is from Bass T. Right.
We don't have our glasses on.
I can only
We're
read
old.
sort of things. I'm an old man. I'm a very old man as of today.
Well, happy birthday.
Thank you.
We did this all for your birthday.
I'm 73 years old today.
Yeah.
Which American artists were very famous outside of the U.S. and not inside the U.S.? And I would take that a little further and ask you, are there artists in this auction who fit that description?
Good question. Well, of course, Rothko is a global champion of color field and expressionism, and from his early work, surrealism and all of that. So Rothko is the quick answer. The funny thing about the category of American art is that for the longest time, it's been exclusively been collected by Americans or expats living abroad, but Americans. I would say 97% of my auctions over the past 25 years have been purchased almost exclusively by Americans. That said, people are standing up and they're noticing. They're noticing the value they can find in an American art sale. And I've said this before, I might have said this to you. If someone has $1 million, which of course is a lot of money, but with $1 million, you can build a beautiful blue chip museum quality collection of American art versus one piece in post-war and contemporary. One Warhol, one $70 million Warhol is very different than some true masterworks here at every price point. So for the longest time, it's been pretty much confined to American collectors. But we've seen people outside illustration has become collected globally. We have seen outsider art and Black art being collected globally. Mm-hmm. We are even seeing now Impressionism. Mary Cassatt for the longest time has been considered exclusively an American painter, but she has been elevated to the upper echelon of all important Impressionists. So Mary Cassatt has truly become a global collectible artist.
And
as
isn't that also reflected in some ways by the prices in the last couple of years?
Oh yeah.
That Lion Decker, for instance.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
The estimate on it was based upon expectations, based upon prior sales, of course, which is how estimates are set.
Right.
So you cannot know, but are taken by surprise when someone is finally realized, whether in this country or by a collector outside, that suddenly that artist is having a moment.
Absolutely. We're seeing that a lot. I mean, in our entire category, we are seeing such stupendous prices. I mean, new benchmarks for a multitude of artists. Ernie Barnes, for instance. I mean, who would have thought 5 years ago that an Ernie Barnes would sell at auction for over $15 million? Or Grandma Moses, who's at the 7-figure mark as well. Milton Avery. This is great for all artists in our category.
And that's an expansion of the collector base. It's not just the same 15 people buying Ernie Barnes who were for the last God knows how long.
I agree with that. I think that the market has become more global, but it's also that people, the diehard collectors, are understanding they're having more competition. There are new collectors coming in every season. We're seeing new buyers in American art, which is so exciting because what's the term in the Bible? There's nothing new under the sun, the Torah.
Right.
I'm really going back to my education here. But in American art,
well, just stick it with the birds.
we're going to stick exactly.
There you go.
But there's very little that one can consider new in American art. But we are, in fact, seeing this now. There is a sea change in the category of American art because major collectors from other categories are putting their hat in the ring, not only for modernism, not only for illustration, but they're getting involved in Western art and California art and New York scenes, art by women, Black artists, Hudson River School even. I mean, we are seeing people from Germany. Albert Bierstadt was German, a German American. And many of our artists came from Europe, came from other parts of the world, or went abroad to study. I mean, Leindecker and his brother, FX Leindecker, spent the early part of their careers studying the masters.
Right.
Or even with this William Truss Richards behind us. I know we're sort of switching
That's
gears
all right.
and jumping generations.
That's why we have it all behind us so we can talk about it with great ease.
I like that. So even this William Truss Richards, which is one of my favorites in the entire
All right,
sale.
let's talk about it now.
So the William Truss Richards is part of a beautiful group of Hudson River material that has come to us from Santander Bank, a beautiful corporate collection, fresh to market, prime examples, beautiful condition, and we've got works by Samuel Coleman and Thomas Moran and Child Hassam and some other works, Britcher. But this William Truss Richards is very special to me in that it is an extremely rare example of William Truss Richards' body of work from a period, 9 years, not even a decade, where he was focusing on pre-Raphaelite details. And that came from, the reason I'm bringing this up is that he saw a show in Philadelphia, an English pre-Raphaelite show, where he had exposure. You know, some of these artists didn't have to necessarily travel abroad to study the masters. These masters were coming to America. And he saw this show of pre-Raphaelites in 1858 and was so moved by it and was so inspired by it that he spent 9 years painting only a handful of these works that take a long time to paint. I mean, if you got up close to the picture plane here, the details in this painting are extraordinary, where he sort of flushed the horizontal format that he favored before, the sort of panoramic landscapes, and he stopped doing this in 1867, the year this was painted. This was, you know, sort of the door closed and he went back to what he did earlier on.
People can see it a little closer right there.
There you go. So you see that beautiful, the whole foreground has fabulous, tight, accurate, perfect interpretations, these Raphaelite details of the flora and the fauna, and every leaf and every blade of grass is meticulously rendered, and with that beautiful raking light coming through the trees, sort of through that opening in this.
Well, this is one of those pieces that I've said to you many times. What I'm enamored of for this particular period are those artists who could make these pieces look illuminated from behind. This is another one of those pieces.
It glows. It's absolutely.
But that's beautiful. A lot of that's in some ways a signature of the best Hudson River School
absolutely,
artists.
Absolutely.
Their pieces all look like there's a light behind them.
They glow, yeah, they do. They do. So does Maxwell Parrish.
That's
it all comes together. Illustration, Hudson River. But I agree. And our estimate at 50 to 70,000 to me is quite enticing. There have been other examples from this pre-Raphaelite period, this rare, handful of works that have sold for 200,000 or more. So there's sort of a cult following for these works.
But this is also fresh to market, as you noted a moment ago. And that's what intrigues me, because a lot of what I find in your auctions is either fresh to market or it hasn't been on the market in a very long time.
Yes.
So talk to me a little bit about that in terms of assembling it, because I assume, A, that impacts your expectations, but also you don't really quite know, right? Because this, for instance, has never been on the market. So therefore,
it has not been on the market, but I have sold in the past over the course of my career a couple of other important pre-Raphaelite works. And I know from speaking to the community that these works appeal to, I mean, the size of them is quite intimate. So they work well for collectors, but they also work really well for institutions and museums. I mean, this is not a very large work, but it really holds a wall because it's so well done. It has that great light source on it. I mean, even in the dark, this painting glows.
Yeah, it's a stunning piece.
It has star power.
It's funny, I did not think much of it, only in as much as that there were other pieces that spoke to me. But when we sat here today getting ready for this, as I stood in front of it, I was sort of hypnotized by its
Right?
radiance.
Totally. That's one I get very attached to almost every object I sell in these sales, but this one in particular, I just find myself, if I have 2 minutes of free time between work issues, I'll open up the catalog just to look at the picture of it. I'll be sad when it goes to its next home, but I'll be happy as well. We're going to find a good home for it. But going back to your question about how we put these sales together, I consider myself a little bit of an Indiana Jones, if you will. And that's,
Well, it all belongs in a museum.
it all belongs in a museum, but I do consider myself an explorer in that not only, I mean, we're leaders in the fields of American art. It's not just a season or two. This is a permanent thing. We are at the top of the field in illustration, in American art, not just illustration, in American art. We hold over 130 auction records in the category, and we are offered spectacular material every season now. And we're at a point where we can be very selective in what we pick to put in these sales. So in addition to being reactive, responding to the inquiries that come across our desks and the calls we receive and the clients that come in, we spend a lot of time being very proactive as well. So if I see my sale coming together and I see a lot of great Hudson River, but I need some maritime art, for instance, I'd like to tell that story as well. Maritime art is a hugely important subcategory within American art. I will actively work within the world, my clients, with curators, with colleagues across different categories, and search out other material that sort of complements what we have and tells a really beautiful story of American art. So in this sale, in addition to really wonderful examples of the Hudson River School from Santander Bank and others, we also have a really beautiful collection of maritime art that came in through my colleague in the Rare Book and Manuscripts department, has been working with this client for many years, was a client of ours through that category. And because of our very strong relationships, decades in the making, in other categories, we're sort of building on that to say, great, you're comfortable working with us on manuscripts. Look at what we're doing with American art. Work with us.
Right.
And that's what happens. We have got this great little mini single owner collection of maritime art as well.
You know, before we get back, and look, we'll talk about the Rothko in a moment. You have a lot to say about it. I'm fascinated by it. There's an illustration art behind. There's two more illustration art pieces I want to talk about. The one over my left shoulder, that's the Stevens, if I'm not mistaken.
The Frederick Stanley.
Frederick Stanley.
Frederick Stanley. I love that painting. Oh my God.
But I'm fascinated by Stanley, in as much that Stanley, obviously over here to the view is far right, is the Leyendecker, the 1906 Colliers. They're very much, they speak to each other in a lot of ways. But the Stanley piece, obviously, I think you're incredibly fond of for a number of reasons.
I'm incredibly fond of it because not only was Frederick Stanley an amazing draftsman, I mean, some of the students who came in earlier, and when I had my preview up in New York, someone said, which lot is that Rockwell? And I said, it's not a Rockwell. It's as good as a Rockwell, but it's another artist. I mean, if this was a Rockwell, a post cover with such a fabulously engaging subject matter, which is a bit sensational. I mean,
a bit risque for the time.
Oh my gosh, 1921.
Maybe a bit risque for this time.
It was. I mean, this is a boy in drag for Halloween that was on the cover of the Saturday Evening Post in 1921. That is amazing.
It's very bold. It's very
bold.
It's extraordinary how it's potent, but shouldn't be in 2022.
That's exactly right. And I love telling that story. I want to elevate the brand of all of the Golden Age illustrators, not just Rockwell and Leyendecker and Maxfield Parrish. Everybody is aware of how amazing and how important they are, but it is time, it is past the time of elevating these. I mean, I've for many years referred to them as secondary and tertiary artists, but they're not. I can't even use those terms anymore because they are masters in their own right.
What do you think took so long for them to be recognized the way that they should be? Is it because it was disposable? It was a magazine cover.
It was commercial art.
Right.
It was when I began my career in the late 90s, illustration art was poo-pooed by many, not only within the greater world of auction, but by even within American art catalogs. You would never see an illustration on the cover. But, you know, we went through the past 20 years where we are seeing Rockwells and Leyendeckers sell for more than Child Hassam and Cassatt and Frieseke and Edward Hopper and Frederick Church. So the market is telling us that they consider this one of the most important aspects of American art. And the prices are there and the buyers are there. It's one of the categories within American art that we are seeing every season new buyers come into play.
Yeah.
And compete and throw their hat in the ring. And these are clients that are not only seasoned collectors in the arena of fine art, but collectors from other categories, coin clients. And that's even, you know, for instance, this child Hassan in the sale, this fabulous Hassan.
Tommy, can you pull that up? It's the Coca-Cola advertisement.
Let's take a look, shall we?
It's fantastic.
There you go. So that's a Hassan that
that's right.
is from 1893. You know what's sort of cool?
What's that?
It's cool that we have hanging what our viewers, our friends here can't see, is that we are hanging the Hassan from 1893 very close on the wall to the Cassatt dry point that was executed circa 1893.
That is correct. They're inches, feet away.
Yep, and they have a theme here because the Cassatt is a very rare and super important example. You know, Cassatt is of course known for her oils and her watercolors depicting maternity, and you know, she studied with Degas and she went abroad to study the masters. But what people don't realize, or some people don't realize, is that she was an extraordinary printmaker as well. And they're extremely rare. She is, you know, scholars and curators consider her dry points to be some of the most important and the most modern printmaking work of the, you know, fourth quarter of the 19th century, and they are. And we're seeing big prices for them. They're extremely rare. There's something like only 11 of these in existence. The number is not 100% confirmed because different scholars have a different number, but it's around 11 of them. But that was based, some of the figures in the Cassatt were based on a mural that Cassatt did for the Chicago Exposition. And then we've got the Hassan, which is a depiction of the Chicago Exposition.
Right.
How fun is that to see them together?
Is that accidental?
So that's an example of perfect happenstance. My colleagues in the Chicago office, Roberta and Rudy, worked with a client on bringing that Cassatt in, and I was working on the Hassan while they were working on the Cassatt. And once they came in together, I had this aha moment of, oh my God, this is a moment. The Chicago Exposition was hugely important, once again, in American history.
Right.
As much as in art history. And so these works in particular might appeal not only to collectors of Impressionism and American art and illustration even. You know, the Hassan reads a bit as an illustration as well. It tells a story. But they may also appeal to a coin collector or a banknote collector or a historical collector.
Or perhaps a Chicago museum who would like to pair them together.
Exactly. And there are a lot of people out there that collect based on subject or world events. So just like there are clients who collect geographic locations, there are Florida collectors, Southern art collectors, New York scenes. There are people who collect based on events like the Chicago's World Fair. And so that's pretty cool. I like that. I like broadening our buyer.
I mean, it's fascinating, right? We just finished the Texas art auction, which did incredibly well.
Yes.
Set a record for one of the Dallas 9 artists.
Yes.
Somebody I would love to collect the Dallas 9, being a Dallas native. But it is interesting because there were pieces that I thought, if I were getting into collecting, I would collect for incredibly personal reasons. Being a Dallas native, the Dallas 9 would have been something I would have liked to have. Or a David Bates, Dallas artist.
I love David Bates.
But I'm interested if you have found that people's collecting tastes, interests, and needs have changed during this sort of renaissance in American art auction. And
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, I have clients who used to be traditional Stieglitz circle collectors, for instance, people who would only collect Georgia O'Keeffe and Oscar Blumner and John Marin. And we have some great Stieglitz circle modernism in the sale as well. I could go on and on, you guys. I think I need I need a YouTube channel where I could just talk all day about American art.
I'm sure people would love it. All right, so let's take a question. And again,
let's take
ask questions or tommyn@ha.com if you would just like to do it anonymously. But Carol asks, can you explain a little more about the dry point technique?
Ooh, that's a good question. You know, I don't pretend to be a scholar and an expert on print and multiples, but with dry points, each work is unique and hand painted by the artist. So with this work in particular, the plate that she used to make the print, she would select different colors for each work. So others' example of this specific print have different colors. And I urge you all to go to our website, ha.com, or see the catalog, the hard copy catalog, because we speak at length about this process and how Cassatt would choose a different palette for each of these works. So in a sense, people consider dry points, lithographs, etchings to be prints and multiple parts of an edition, and they are in some ways, but at the same time, they're also each unique. And that's why they're getting some big prices. Yes, you can get other examples of this dry point because it's part of an edition used from the same plate, but because they are each hand painted, Audubon did the same thing, where he would hand paint some of these works. And therefore, each one is particularly special and rare because you're sort of seeing a window into Cassatt's mind and how she was laying out her colors and her the effect of light and shadow and the flattening and the Japanism of how she depicts her figures here. I mean, if you look at these, you can tell how clearly she was influenced by Japanese printmaking. You see sort of the flattened figures. It's sort of...
And the color scheme, too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I must tell you again that for a work that was executed circa 1893, the colors are extraordinarily fresh and bright. And that says a lot.
Let's talk about the Leyendecker. I'm fascinated by it.
Oh, I love
discus thrower.
I love the discus thrower.
I'm looking, people can't see that I'm actually looking at a couple of other Leyendeckers. There's the Rockwell to my right that nobody can see. Tommy, I'm sure, can pull it up in just a moment. But this Leyendecker from 1906, it was hanging in Dallas actually for a little while.
Absolutely.
People would stop and look at it.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. We had that hanging in New York, and our office is on Park Avenue. We've got windows, and there were a few people who came in, they were drawn in by the Leyendecker. Because the discus thrower is an early work. He just came back from Europe a few years earlier. He went with his brother to study the masters, and he looked at Bouguereau, and he looked at other major masters who were working on depictions of body and form and different methods of paint application. And it's only when he came back from Europe where he really chose to focus heavily on the male form. And he developed his cross-hatching technique where he uses these sort of staccato brushwork to lay on the paint in a very Leyendecker way. And this work in particular, what I love about this one, I love all the Leyendeckers in this sale, and we've got every price point here. They go from 30,000 up into the several hundred thousand, but this one is in with an estimate of 100 to 150,000. This one really conjures Greek revival and classical antiquities. You see the sort of that band behind him. And what some of you may not know, and of course I know some of you do, is that Leyendecker was also focused. He did a series of works based on Egypt. And these are some very cool works that are three-dimensional almost. He built up a relief-like surface on these works of Egyptians and classical depictions. So when I see this work, I see a window into the Leyendecker's brain. And what's exciting to me is that you sort of see where he's coming from. You see what is important to him: the male form, the body form, the layout of color. He's a graphic painter. You see his every sinewy muscle in his arm is clearly delineated. The socks down by his feet, you see one is sort of rolled down more than the other. The curvature of the body that is so lyrical and almost like a snake, like a serpent. The muted palette that he was using, that he didn't really get into those bright colors until later when the printing press allowed him to use different colors. So for me, this work is important academically because it shows his evolution, but it's also really important aesthetically because it's a freaking beautiful painting. And this work will appeal to diehard Leyendecker collectors. It will appeal to the LGBTQ plus community because of that sort of fabulous, we've discussed this as well, and it's no secret that there's often people refer to this sort of homoerotic vibe that you can get in some of his works. He has become, and he's not even unsung, we were discussing this earlier, for many decades, he was sort of the unsung hero of the gay community.
So to that point, that brings me to something I want to ask you about. So Leyendecker is the subject of a recent short documentary. It was on Paramount Plus. I think you may actually be able to still find it on Paramount Plus.
Yep.
So as we saw 2.5 years ago when, let's say, Michael Jordan gets the last dance.
Yes.
And suddenly Michael Jordan rookie cards go from $30,000 to $700,000. Do you find that Leyendecker's acknowledgement, as this film makes its way through the festival circuit and theatrical and now on Paramount Plus, does that at all impact the value of or interest in Leyendecker the way that The Last Dance did for Jordan?
I think so. Line
I'm
Decker.
not saying they're the same.
I'm thinking about it. No, that's a good comparison. Obviously, it's different.
As somebody gets a rise in attention and acclaim hundreds of years, 100 years later, decades later, I would think that would make some kind of a difference.
It does. Up until a few years ago, certainly before we sold Football Hero, a lot of clients who are not necessarily familiar with Golden Age illustration, big collectors even, they knew Rockwell, they didn't necessarily know Line Decker.
Right.
And you had to always explain, oh, well, he was the post cover illustrator before Rockwell. Rockwell felt competitive with Line Decker. Rockwell refused to paint more Saturday Evening Post covers than Line Decker because to Rockwell, Line Decker was the master. But the big difference between both of them in their lifetimes is that Rockwell was a household name in his lifetime. Mm-hmm. He was a celebrity. He was just as important as his body of work.
Right.
Line Decker was a much more behind the scenes, quiet man because he was never able to fully be who he was, who he wanted to be.
The subject of the documentary.
Yeah.
And now that's very much with that.
Yeah, with Charles Beach, his partner for many years. It's sad. It's heartbreaking that there was a confidence he was lacking in that he felt that there was this whole part of his life that really informed his art that he couldn't talk about or make public. And because of that documentary and because of, the exposure of him in the marketplace, these big prices he's getting, everybody is starting to learn his story. And he in his own right, aside from his art, just Line Decker himself has become a hero to many.
Yeah. I'll remind folks one more time, ask a question because we're running out of time.
Are we already? Oh my God.
What time is it?
It's 2:35 Central Time.
All right. So we've been going for about 35 minutes. Ask some more questions. The Rothko. We're going to talk about Rothko. I want to show folks the Rockwell. We've talked about it. Tommy, if you don't mind, could you pull up the Rockwell real quick before we get to Rothko? Because it is something we've talked about. It is something that was incredibly popular today. I do love that Rockwell.
It's so fun. It is so sweet. And it's just so simple in its composition. And the Rockwell will appeal to collectors of Rockwell, of course, and Golden Age illustration. But there's so many sweet nuances. And that's the special thing about Rockwell, that every season when a major Rockwell comes up and available for sale at any house, you will see people gravitate towards it for a bunch of different reasons. It could be the subject matter. When we sold Home for Thanksgiving for $4.2 million, we had collectors of illustration art interested, but we also had people who were Army vets and military vets and who were interested in anything that had to relate to World War II. And we're seeing that as well with the Rockwell.
There it is, right there.
So it appeals to people who are interested in chess and who are interested in puppies. And, the figure on the left is some of you may recognize him because this is a model that Rockwell used a lot. He was one of Rockwell's favorite models. He was a tiny little man with that big handlebar mustache that you'll see over and over. He was a muse, so to speak, for Rockwell.
And does that impact the value of this piece? Because it is an icon. It's an Easter egg of sorts.
Yes,
for Rockwell
it is. Oh, I like that. It's an Easter egg. I like that. And the color is a little Easter eggy. Yes, it does, because it's not a Saturday Evening Post cover. And with Golden Age illustration, whether it's Dohanos or Frederick Stanley or Rockwell or Line Decker, or John Falter, the list goes on and on. Right. There's the Saturday Evening Post material. That's the holy grail. And then there's everything else. There's a benchmark, all the 7, 8, 9 figure, almost 9 figure marks. We'll get to 9 figures one of these days. I'm telling you, if a Warhol can sell for $200 million, I told you before that I was going to sell a Line Decker for 7 figures. We did that.
You have reminded me of that several times since as well.
I will. And I'm telling you, you heard it here first. We're going to get a Rockwell for $100 million in our lifetime. It's going to happen. Knock on wood.
Do you know which one it would be offhand?
Oh my God, pressure.
You don't have to say it out loud, but you know.
Well, I imagine that it would be something relate from the 1940s where the composition went all out, full explosion of color and narrative, perhaps related to Willie Gillis from the World War II series, from the, War Bonds. I imagine it will be from that period. But I don't know. We'll see. You just wait. You'll see. It's going to come out. It may be next year, maybe in 10 years, but we'll be here talking about it.
See, what I love about that Rothko, and for instance, and also, Tommy, if you don't mind pulling up the Coca-Cola advertisement that's staring at me. That's another one of my favorite pieces.
Isn't it great? So engaging.
It is.
Right?
But see, that's what I think I find fascinating, because when I was a kid, American art meant Bierstadt. It meant Moran.
Sure.
It meant old fussy
brown paintings
with
with
very
the brown
gilded
furniture.
frames.
Yes.
And as I've gotten to work, as 2.5 years ago when I came here, you've redefined for me what American art meant. And certainly it's interesting. We have discussions right around the office. Is Frank Miller American art?
All good questions. And that's what we are doing at Heritage. We are an American auction house. The owners of Heritage are collectors themselves, and they see as clearly as we do that American art must be elevated as its own brands.
Well, it's interesting. We just sold the James Bond, the Bob McGinnis cover for the poster for $275,000.
The poster,
the original artwork for the Thunderball poster, set a record for the Doc Savage book cover. That was a book cover. You take away the title, you take away the text, and that's just a beautiful piece of Doc Savage, and it sold for a record number.
So it's interesting that you bring up the Doc Savage.
That's American art.
It is. Well, the Doc Savage actually came to us from a collector of American art in
the
New York office, and that speaks exactly to your point. The collectors are informing us of what defines American art. And with each of our sales here, we're pushing the envelope because the world is watching what we're doing here with American art. They're watching. And every season, clients are getting more comfortable consigning and buying American art outside of the traditional heritage categories of American art. So it's not just illustration and it's not just Western art anymore, but we are seeing major collectors come to us and consigners from these other categories. Curators are coming to us. Hudson River collectors are coming to us. Sculpture collectors are coming to us. Rothko collectors are coming to us because they're seeing that clients, and a lot of our American art clients tend to be a little older, a little bit more, sometimes clients will begin actively collecting not until their 50s, 60s, and even 70s. And
as a man in his 70s, I'm looking forward to beginning my collecting.
70s, please. In dog years. Just kidding. Well, you look like you're a teenager.
Well, thanks. I feel like I'm in my 90s.
We both do. We're getting older. That's what happens, Robert.
So, but it is interesting because collecting, as you get older, you tend to begin to value, or even if you can afford, like the Coke piece. Tommy, I'm sorry, you had it up there, and I did not dress it. It is one of my favorite pieces. It has been staring at us for the last 45 minutes.
It's great.
I am enamored of it.
So Haddon Sandblom is probably most well known for his Coca-Cola Santa.
Yes.
You've all seen it. I've actually seen it recently on the FDR in New York. We've sold Coca-Cola Santas. It's a big, burly Santa, a happy, jovial Santa holding a classic Coca-Cola bottle. And that's what's happening here too. So it's obviously not Santa holding it, but it's a working man. It's exactly the kind of guy that you would see.
There's nothing more American than that image.
Nothing more American than that image. And he's smiling, even though he's doing backbreaking labor, and he's smiling to take that Coca-Cola.
That's right.
Because Coca-Cola is an American icon as much as Rockwell is.
Right.
They go hand in hand. And that's what I love about our category, that we are just as important to the legacy of our country. We've got to elevate American art and bring it more to the forefront of every institution.
Right.
We need to see more collections, and museums are responding. I mean, the Metropolitan Museum of Art in recent years, in the past 20 years, has done a major retrospective on Winslow Homer. They've done one on Child Hassam. It's happening. We're seeing it happen.
You had an institution call you this morning while I was
that's right. I had two institutions call this morning.
I heard one phone call.
Because everybody is understanding. It's sort of.
What is my favorite institution, by the way?
Is it?
I was very excited to hear that phone call.
Oh, I love that.
Yes. So go ahead. I'm sorry.
But we're seeing institutions come to us to help them with buying, selling, and advising.
Yeah.
Because we're all in the same boat here. We all care about American art. We care about its legacy, and we understand how important it is to leave the next generation. We need a plan for the next generation of specialists and curators and collectors. We need to hand it to them on a silver platter to continue the momentum of American art going. And so we will always have a standalone sale of American art at Heritage, and we will always elevate American art as its own entity, irrespective of any other category.
So let's talk about Rothko. It's been sitting behind us, taunting us, teasing us as we've been talking for the last 45 minutes or so.
Yeah.
When I heard we had a Rothko, and I was excited to go look at it, I went to see it, I said, that does not look like a Rothko to me.
No.
This is obviously an early Rothko, Last Supper. It is not something that I would have necessarily pegged right away as a Rothko.
That's right.
I'm fascinated by it nevertheless. The more I've looked at it, the more I've sort of come to appreciate and understand its relevance in the Rothko timeline. What is it like for you to be able to offer something like this? I mean, it is,
I almost don't even know where to begin.
Primordial Rothko in a way.
It is such an important work. It's one of the most important works that I've ever handled in my career. And I've sold works that have sold for more. And I've, sold works that have gone to museums.
This hasn't sold. You never know what it'll sell for.
Sky's the limit. I mean, the estimate on our Rothko is $1.5 to $2.5 million, which of course is a lot of money. But when you put it in context in relation to his color field work, which can sell for $70 million, this is obviously a much different price point. And we want to show our client base, our estimates, remember, they're not asking prices. We use them as a marketing tool so people understand what we're selling.
It is a discussion, the beginning of the discussion.
Exactly. So at $1.5 to $2.5 million, people certainly understand that this is an important work. But that sweet spot is sort of an enticing level where people will bid competitively on it. And competition, just like every other aspect of the auction world and just like real estate, it's all about competition. That's what drives the prices. Just like the line decker that we sold for $4.1 million, it was the competition in the context of the auction that elevated it. And I felt it was important to include this Rothko in this sale specifically because Rothko is closely related to some of our most important American modernists. Milton Avery he was friends with Rothko. They inspired each other. Rothko gave the eulogy at Avery's funeral. Rothko was taught by and worked with Max Weber. And so these are artists that are firmly rooted in the arena of American art. But he's so entangled with these artists. They were sort of all looking at the world the same way. They're all sort of trying to figure out a way to present modernism in a new way and abstraction in a new way, while also sharing the insights of their lives as Jewish artists who were still grappling with the atrocities of what they've seen from World War I and World War II, and even the atrocities of just life in general that they were seeing in America. Rothko is from a Jewish family. In fact, his real name is Rothkowitz, and this is one of the first works where he signed his name Rothko. And that's important in its own right. Yeah, isn't that cool? So this is one of only
the origin story.
There you go. It's the origin story. And I've had people come in here and look at this work and say, when I see this painting, I see Jasper Johns, I see Otto Dix, I see George Gross. I see
I like
Max
the Jasper
Weber.
Johns comparison. That's interesting.
I mean, it's extraordinary. You see that band of red, white, and blue.
Yeah.
You start to see in the background his bands of color. It's clearly moving in that direction, but he's still based in literal depiction of a group of men, 5 men, and they're completely disjointed. You see that influence of Picasso almost, this sort of fragmented cubism where it's rooted in realism, but he sort of flushes that format and creates his own voice and interprets this scene, the Last Supper, which is a nod to not only the Last Supper of Jesus from the Testament, but it's also a nod to this famous story in Jewish history of a group of rabbis in Bnei Brak in Israel, where they were discussing the plight of the Jews and the atrocities they've seen and sort of where do we go as a Jewish people from here? How do we maintain our integrity and our will to go on in the face of such terrifying and horrible things that we've seen happen in the world.
I'll bring my rabbi to come see it when you're in Dallas November 2nd.
He should. But this is truly a work. It actually just came back to us. It was at a retrospective in Vienna devoted exclusively to Rothko's early work. And this is one of the only works available in private hands. Most of these are in museum collections. This might be the only one, certainly that I've ever seen, that has come to market from a private collection. So this really is a moment. This is a museum quality work.
Absolutely.
That once again will appeal to private collectors, but also institutions. I'd love to see this go to the Jewish Museum or the Wilczek Foundation in New York. I mean, it's that important to the history of the world and of humanity, but about our history as well. Mm-hmm. So I'm really excited to see what's going to happen with this work. It gets me. I'm looking at it now and I feel it in my heart.
Well, it's interesting. It was hanging in the office in Dallas for a little while, and it got a lot of attention. It was next to the Sendak, and People were just obsessed by the fact that this was Rothko unlike any that they had ever seen.
That's right.
The color field work there obviously is.
That's right. But it's interesting that you brought up the Sendak because you've got two artists here, very different periods, very different schools of art, but they're both, acknowledging their Jewish backgrounds and their work in different ways.
Right.
Their history, their culture, and they're taking what they've learned and they're sort of presenting it to the world in a timeless way to sort of remember this moment in time. And these works are truly as timeless now as when they were painted, and they will be as timeless in 100 years from now. They'll stand the test of time.
It's funny. We are wrapping it up. We haven't talked about the outsider art in this auction.
I know. We have too much to talk about.
For God's sakes, if you would like to study the thesis for this semester, feel free to do so. It is online, obviously.
It's a thesis. If you study this catalog, you guys will all have masters in American art.
This is quite a thing. There are myriad essays. This is
chock full of information for all of you, and beautiful photographs as well.
I just hope I pass the course this semester. So outsider art, there's other things I'm sure you'd love to talk about. If you have a question, you have about 30 seconds, 45 seconds to get it in. We're going to wrap it up here, but you're going to be giving it's going to be here.
The auction itself.
No. The event tonight.
The event tonight is in our Chicago office, this beautiful Chicago office. And I will say another thing, the last point I want to make.
Please.
This
is for you.
Thank you, Robert. It's for American art.
It is.
I'm really excited to see and be part of a company that understands the importance of bringing museum quality work, especially American art, to the middle of America. I mean, this office we have in Chicago is beautiful. It's extraordinary. We are really moving forward and looking at the next generation of how we sell art, because for the longest time, the center of the art world has been New York. There's some other sites, a little bit LA, a little bit Korea now, China, Japan, Paris, London. But in America, it's important that we make sure that everybody in our country has access to this art. So our company is investing heavily in creating offices and experiences like this across the country. So we hold previews like this in Chicago, in Beverly Hills, in Texas, and we're the only house that does this. And it makes sense because we're an American house and we understand the importance of bringing, much like what Alice Walton did with Crystal Bridges in Bentonville, Arkansas, we want to bring art to everybody, not just in New York. And that's what we're doing here in Chicago this week.
If nothing else, come see it.
Yes, come see it. Come visit us.
Come to Dallas, November 2nd and 3rd. I mean, again, one of the reasons I came here in March of 2020 was to work in a place where I could be in a museum every day.
And you are.
It's truly spectacular. Thanks for doing this.
My pleasure.
Thank you, everybody, for watching. Thanks for the questions. And again, if you would like to reach Aviva, avival@ha.com. Do you have a number you'd like to give them?
Yes, my direct number is 212-486-3530. Reach out to me.
Thanks again. We'll do another one of these, I'm sure, sooner than later, but a real pleasure.
And happy birthday.
Hell of a way to spend my birthday.
Happy birthday.
My 93rd birthday.
You're 93.
Yay.
You started 73.
Well,
you aged 20 years in the past hour?
Not because of you.
Good.